few weeks ago, President Obama and the Department of Homeland Security announced a new program that they're going to offer something called deferred action to immigrant youth in America. Some people think, hooray, it's the DREAM Act. I'm here today with Harlan York to talk to you about what President Obama's program really is and to help you understand a little bit more about it and evaluate whether you might qualify. Let me tell you about Harlan first. Harlan's an attorney in Newark, New Jersey. He also practices in New York, but he's a 17 years experience in the field, and he's handled cases all over the United States. Harlan specializes in all kinds of U.S. immigration law, but in particular, he's familiar with the complex rules about being in deportation or what we call removal proceedings. Harlan's got a lot of great credentials behind his name too. This year he was named as the outstanding immigration lawyer by Best Lawyers of America for all of the state of New Jersey. I'm Professor Lenny Benson. I teach at New York Law School. I've been in immigration law for 28 years, and I teach courses involving immigration law, and I also run a pro bono project here at the school called Safe Passage. We're going to try to just give you very plain information about what deferred action is and help you evaluate whether it's something you want to investigate further. So Harlan, this idea, this deferred action, that's not a green card, is it?
No, not at all.
How would you define it?
I think deferred action is most easily defined as, one, a way for people to get work authorization, which is so desperately needed by so many people, and that one document that they always say, I need to feed my family or simply myself. And two, I would say deferred action is most significant in that it protects people from deportation.
So let me just do it again. It's two things. It's a promise not to deport you. So it's really like a settlement with the government that says, we're not going to remove you right now. And second, it gives you a work ID card. If they're going to use the same card that they use for other people, it's your picture, and it has authorization to work right on the front of it.
Correct. And if I may simply add to that, the number one problem that so many youth that we see who will, in a moment, talk more about with you, fall into this category, so desperately need these work cards, is because, one, all employers are so concerned that they have the proper documentation, of course, to comply with the law, but more importantly, none of these people, and I'm not going to say kids, if I unfortunately refer to them as kids throughout this discussion, I'm talking about a group of people that ranges a wide spectrum of age, but we're talking about kids in the sense that they don't have driver's licenses. Once they get their work permit, they can get a social security number, and in most states, those two documents can lead to them getting a driver's license.
Yep, that's like a little complicated subject, driver's licenses, because some states have even more onerous requirements, and we're hopeful that when you have deferred action, you get your work authorization card, you'll definitely get a social security card, you'll be able to also get a driver's license.
Correct.
So, all right, great idea, deferred action, come out, come forward, register, you won't be deported, and you'll get work authorization. Let's talk about who qualifies, and then let's talk about whether there's any downsides. So what are the basic requirements to qualifying under this new President Obama's Youth Deferred Action Program?
The way I see it, rather than going through a long laundry list for folks, is to try to make this as basic as we can for the moment. You've got to be at least 15 years old, and you must have been under age 31 as of the date of the announcement and accompanying memorandum by the Secretary of the Homeland Security Department, Janet Napolitano, which was on June 15th of this year, 2012. So basically, you're talking about an age range of between, again, 15 and 31 as of 6/15/12, with some understanding that if you're not 15 yet, you may still be able to qualify in certain instances. In addition to that, you must be able to show you've been here 5 continuous years, that you don't have any serious crimes. We're still going to work out soon, hopefully, what that means, that you're either enrolled in school, have a high school diploma, a GED, or are working on a GED, or finally have military service. That opens up a whole other series of issues, but I'll leave it at that for now. And even if you've had current or pending or prior deportation or removal problems, you are still eligible to apply for deferred action.
That's great. We threw a lot at you, so we're going to go over it one more time, and we'll just walk through it a little bit more slowly. If you are 12 years old and watching this video, you're not eligible to apply for this program. You have to be at least 15. And you had to enter the country before you were 16. So if you came to the United States on a tourist visa or you came illegally, surreptitiously when you were 18, you're out of luck.
Correct.
All right, you have to be under 31. One of the questions none of us know is once this program gets going, and as we're going to explain, nobody can apply, most people can't apply yet, what happens when you turn 32, 33, 34? We don't know the answers to that question yet. You have to be in school or have graduated or have earned a GED. What if you're out of school right now? Can you go down to your local school and say, let me in?
The real life answer to that question is there are accredited GED programs that I would encourage people who might qualify for deferred action to look into if they do not have a GED or a high school diploma that will hopefully accept you. Some people are already telling me they won't take me unless I have certain documents, which of course are the same types of documents that you'd get if you received deferred action, so we're in that vicious cycle. However, the short answer is I've seen people come in already in the last few weeks since I've started doing consultations and speaking with people about deferred action that have these accredited GED certificates that are certainly documents that can be confirmed to be legitimate for the purposes of other means by which someone would show a GED. For example, GED required for work.
Okay. So when we say accredited, what we mean is a licensing authority from the state government has approved that school, that institution, to give you a graduate educational diploma without you having to go to regular high school. But if you're, let's say, 14, 15, 16, and you're thinking about applying to this program, in most states, you're entitled to go to school. And the Supreme Court decided almost 30 years ago that even if you're undocumented in the United States, you have a right to an education through high school. If you're having trouble getting enrolled in the school in your area, you really may want to contact an immigration advocacy group in your community or the ACLU. Here in New York, they have a special project that just works on helping kids go to school. Harlan was warning everybody, you may not have noticed, where he said an accredited GED program. Unfortunately, there's going to be some people who want to take shortcuts, or their families or friends advise them, just buy this paper and it will say you went to school. That is not only a path to having your deferred action denied, that's a path to being put in deportation or removal proceedings. The government is going to take very seriously any fraud committed with this program. It simply isn't worth it. I say it's not just a problem for this, it's a problem for life. Do you basically agree with me?
Absolutely. And if I may add one point, if I hadn't said it already, you must have been physically present in the United States on June 15th, which brings up a whole other issue I'm certain we'll cover in a moment, but that also is crucial to the whole issue of fraud that you just brought up.
Right, so if you're watching this video from your home in Central America and you're thinking, I just have to get to the United States and I can say I was there on June 15th, that's something the government's going to be requiring a lot of evidence that you were physically present in the country. Well, you brought up that even people who have outstanding orders of removal, so not everyone knows this, but sometimes your parents were in deportation proceedings, removal proceedings, there's an old order in your family, and you were a kid when it happened, you don't even know about it. There's a way for you to check whether there's a removal order for you if you have your family's A numbers, that's called your alien numbers. But if your family has ever been in immigration court proceedings, you're the kind of person we really want to urge to see an immigration provider, a nonprofit organization, or an experienced immigration lawyer and get advice. Because although this relief is there for you, the government doesn't have to give it to you. They keep saying everything's on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
And they have certain priorities of people that, even though you're in the right age, between 15 and 31, and you've been here 5 years, and you did your GED, if you've got some criminal past, or you've committed other kinds of immigration fraud that they consider very serious, it's a good chance you might find yourself actually in removal proceedings.
That's correct.
So let's talk a little bit about how they're going to know about people's background. I keep hearing this phrase, a biometric check. What is that?
Well, biometrics are the simple processes by which immigration has been for several years using to detect whether or not somebody has a prior record of any sort by photographing the individual and fingerprinting them electronically at what's called an application support center, whether you're applying for a green card, which you're not doing in the deferred action type of case, or in this case, the biometric will simply electronically notify the immigration unit that will be handling the deferred action cases if they get what they'll call simply a hit, which means, oh, this person's come up as a hit. They've got a prior arrest. They've got a prior violation, perhaps, of immigration law. And this is where you've got to be very careful if you're considering this type of relief.
I know a common scenario is people have lived under different names because they had to do what they did to survive in this country. The biometric check is also to consolidate all of your identities and your files. And again, this is a very generous form of protection, this deferred action. If you did use a different name before, if you were in a prior removal proceeding, now you can get it all straightened out, get into your real name, and hopefully you will be able to obtain this status and have it under your name and get all your files connected.
Certainly. We always encourage people in any type of application to disclose all their names that they've used at any time and all their A numbers, because the fingerprints don't lie.
Yeah, not so far. So let's talk a little bit about convictions.
Sure.
We know from the official word that the government's given so far, and everything's really sketchy right now and rather vague, but they have talked about certain convictions that will absolutely prohibit you from qualifying for this relief. And then there's others where it's a little bit gray. So maybe we could go through the list of what kinds of convictions would be the ones that would say, don't apply for this application.
If you've been convicted of a felony, Lenny, I think certainly you don't want to even consider going for deferred action without minimally having a good, in-depth discussion with an immigration attorney who also handles cases involving people who have had criminal pasts, let's say.
Yeah, but suppose you had, I mean, your public defender told you it was a felony, but because you were a juvenile, he said, hey, don't worry about it, it's a youthful first offense.
That's an excellent question. These are the types of ambiguities that we still don't know how the government will treat, because we know that as professionals in this field, without getting too in-depth, there are certain types of convictions that might not be considered an impediment, a problem for you to get deferred action. But again, I think the starting point is to talk to an expert and have them analyze everything you can locate, and they can locate it for you if you don't have it. We'll run a rap sheet for $18 or so with the FBI on someone's fingerprints and get back whatever they've got on their record to verify.
Listen, if you're getting advice about your convictions, somebody who's giving you that advice has to see the actual records. You may remember things like the judge just said to you, kid, I'm letting you off with a warning, but actually what happened was you pled guilty and the judge gave you probation or community service. The definitions of convictions and felonies in immigration law are really technical. So what a lawyer's going to need to evaluate it is the actual records of what happened to you in any kind of criminal court.
Exactly.
So we know a felony can knock you out, and usually that means, I mean, this is a broad generalization, any time you could serve more than 6 months.
Right.
There are some misdemeanors, though, where you can serve up to a year. Do we know, will those misdemeanors knock you out?
We know that immigration so far is using, again, a little bit of a vague expression in saying a significant misdemeanor offense. Or they also talk about multiple misdemeanor offenses.
So we don't know what that is.
Again, it all goes back to, I think, the simple answer. Don't try to figure this stuff out on your own. If you've got any encounters with the law, over the last few weeks, once more, again, as we're speaking, I've been speaking to a lot of folks who say, I've got all the documents and they're coming in with various proofs to show they've been here and they meet all these criteria, and I'll say to them, have you ever been arrested? Are you certain you've never been arrested? Think real hard. Don't leave out anything. I'd rather have them tell me, oh, well, there was the speeding ticket one time or a parking ticket, and I can go, that's it, than say to me no and kind of look the other way, and now I have to double check with them to make sure they're not thinking they're going to put one over on the government who's going to, again, do those biometrics and fingerprints.
Yeah, if there's one thing the government's invested in the last 10 years, it's coordinating all the databases for federal, state, and local criminal convictions. This brings up something, sometimes young people, their parents help them get a good lawyer, and the lawyer is able to get the conviction expunged. That's a term of art meaning wiped off your record. And lawyers will say to you, oh, kid, you never have to mention it again. That's actually not true in a lot of situations. You know, you may not even know this. If you apply to law school, the question asks, have you ever been arrested and convicted? you have to even disclose expunged convictions if you're going to apply to law school. Certainly the federal government treats expungements really seriously. There are some that will not count, but there are others, particularly anything with drugs, you can get an expungement, but it won't remove the bar to immigrating to the United States. So you have to let your lawyer, your advisor, know about expungements as well.
Without question.
All right, now there's one other big group the government's already identified that they're not going to grant deferred action to, and it says anyone the DHS believes will pose a threat to national security or public safety. Who do you think they're talking about there?
It's a good question, but obviously the first thing that everyone comes to think about in the post 9/11 era, though these 11 years later, would be somebody who they might identify as falling into that category. So while we know we're talking about people as young as 15 in most cases and as old as 31, let's just envision a person who does have all the other requirements, the 5 years, the GED or the high school diploma, but maybe they're about 27 or 28 and they have some affiliation, association, or other suspicion, the government that is, or direct evidence that that person's been somehow connected to an organization that has an interest in threatening the national security or public safety.
I think if you've been a member of a gang, that's something that,
right.
even that may be behind you and in your past, that's something I would take really seriously. And certainly if you've been politically involved in groups that our country lists as terrorist organizations, you have to take that really seriously. It can be pretty innocent. You might have donated money to a charity that our government considers a terrorist front, and that will turn up in your background check potentially. So if you've been politically active with groups that maybe aren't popular in the United States, or groups that have opposed the United States, or if you've been involved in gang activity, I think
right.
you really have to take a second look with an advisor before you come forward and apply for this kind of relief. Now, do we know what's going to happen, how long this deferred action is going to last? You're going to get a work card that's good for 2 years.
Right.
What happens at the end of the 2 years?
Nobody knows yet. I think what we do know is this. There has been a strong movement by DHS so far, the Department of Homeland Security, to say that it is possible they will extend this past the first 2 years. Going back to the people who are over 31 included, so if they're over 31 at that point, they still would hopefully be allowed to extend. No one knows how long the government will continue this program, however. People need to think for a moment, as long as they're listening to all of what we're saying, and we're going to get into this in a moment, what other options may exist when they weren't even thinking about those options besides deferred action. But for
right.
now, we know it's 2 years. That's on the table. And I'll add one last point. Since it's an election year, some people are starting to ask me already, well, what if we get a new president? Will he remove this program that's already been put on the table? No one knows that for sure. No one has a crystal ball. Historically, we would say that such a program as this would be extremely unlikely that it would be taken away once it's already been put into place.
Yeah, no one has a crystal ball. There's a lot of good experiences that say sometimes we've given people temporary status like this, like people who are victims of floods or volcanoes or earthquakes. We have extended their temporary permission to remain. That's called temporary protected status.
Right.
So there might be that tradition, but I think people need to think for themselves. Do I want to come forward because I want the government to know I'm here? I want to make a political statement. I want to stand up. I want to be recognized. That's what a lot of young people are doing, and they want this country to know they make a contribution, and they want to be legal. They want to have some kind of status. They won't have permanent resident status, but they'll have work documents.
And I would add one point to that in complete agreement with what you just said. Beyond the statement that they're making, they're also looking at it from the simple standpoint of, I can't get into this college yet. Do you know if it's going to help me with my tuition? I say, I don't know. It depends where you live, or things of that nature. But what I can say is it's also a simple matter of right now, when they come to see me, they're saying, Mr. York, what do I do about this? I don't have any documents. This is a deferred action work permit. What's it going to do for me? And I've already suggested certainly it should lead to a Social Security card in a lot of states, if not most states, a driver's license, and ultimately a job. That right now these kids who have high school diplomas, and in some cases associates and bachelor's degrees even, can't get because they have no working papers.
Yeah, and just in case we weren't clear about this, it's not just people who snuck into the country or brought here as little children. You could have entered with a visa waiver or a tourist visa or even some kind of temporary student or work visa, and you've overstayed. If you're between the ages of 15 and not yet 31, and you've been here 5 years continuously, started out legal, you might qualify for this program too. Well, does this help their family? If somebody is 20 years old, married, but their husband came when they were 18, they're undocumented, and they've got some little kids, does this help them at all?
Spouses and parents who arrived after the age of 16 in no way, shape, or form will qualify for deferred action. Don't believe rumors or stories or even people out there willing to take your money who say that's not true.
This is not family reunification. This is not asylum. This is not the normal lawful permanent resident process which can help reunify a family. Deferred action is one individual case by case. So everybody in your family should get evaluated, but you had to be under 16 when you entered.
Absolutely.
And you have to be under 31. Well, we've got a couple little hypos or examples to go through because maybe it's easier for you to understand what we're saying if we talk about some people. So I'm going to tell you about Sam. He's 15.
Okay.
He came to the United States when he was only 6 years old. His parents had come here for work. They paid a smuggler to bring him over the Canadian border.
Okay.
This is actually pretty common with people from China and people from India and people from Canada. So the smuggler brought Sam into the United States. He's now 15. He came when he was 6. He's been here ever since, never left. His parents are undocumented. He's never been in removal or deportation proceedings. Does Sam look like he qualifies?
I think so, certainly. He sounds like he meets the criteria perfectly.
Well, we do have to make sure he's in school.
Right.
So Sam, you're 15, stay in school. Or start working on that GED. Now Sam could start, even though there's no application process in place yet, he could start gathering documents. What kind of documents does Sam need to show those elements that we went through?
Okay, this is great. We are already gathering documents in many cases, and the first place that the majority, if not almost every single young person I've spoken with in the last few weeks has gone is right to the school, to the personnel office, to the administration of the school that they attend or attended, and gotten a transcript and their diploma and walked those into our offices, as well as other items such as doctor's bills, medical reports, sometimes if they're old enough to be working on payroll somewhere, a paycheck. Last, but also sometimes a very good place to check would be notarizing documents from people attesting to the fact that you've been here and meet these 5 continuous years in physical presence on June 15th criteria.
Like if you're a Boy Scout and you've been really active in your troop and your troop leader's known you since you were just a little thing, that's kind of person who could say, I've seen Sam at the Boy Scout meetings every other week. You know, I've known him since he was 6. He's worked his way up through Scouts. Or maybe it's somebody, it's a little more casual, like you always rent videos or discs, DVDs at the same local bodega. And that bodega owner has your rental records and you had to initial or sign or you know, leave an ID or whatever it is. Maybe your library card. You've got a library card and you've got a record of checking out books. Anything that a third party can put together some, you know, somebody other than yourself can put together some evidence that you've been here, that's a good thing to get. I
would add 2 or 3 items. Most kids, by their late teens, certainly have cell phone records. If they're in your name, obviously, it's helpful. Showing that you made phone calls in the month of June as well as prior to June. ATM records, if you've withdrawn funds on that day or made credit or debit card purchases. And the other one I've been thinking a lot about that I've been seeing in real life, in practice, besides the phone and the bank, is people who can show that they were in the newspaper or they reported an accident. Already I saw one person who was a witness to an accident on June 14th. And I said, that's close to June 15th. I've got a report, he tells me. I said, let me see it. Somebody else has brought me a bunch of newspaper clippings that they're a star athlete in their local community and they're constantly in the local sports pages. I say, absolutely. Those are verifiable documents that prove you've been here.
That's great. One thing people shouldn't do is make up fake documents.
Absolutely not.
back in 1986, we had a general amnesty in this country, and there's a lot of people who went to prison because they bought fake documents or they tried to make them up. Let's put it this way, anything you can invent, the government's probably seen before. It's not a good idea to commit fraud in this process. Well, Sam's case looks like maybe he should apply for deferred action. He'll have to decide, though. Right now, the government doesn't know he's here.
Correct.
And so that's a choice Sam needs to really think through. Does he want to come forward and have the government now have an official record about him, or would he prefer to live the way he's living now, without work authorization, without documents?
It's very hard to speak generally, but I will say this much. So many of the kids who we've been talking with, seeing personally, hearing their stories over the years since the idea of the DREAM Act was first floated years ago in Congress, are coming forward and saying, I am so sick of living this way. I'll do anything that beats the way I'm living now, quote unquote, underground. It's a personal choice, however, and it's one that requires some thought before you get into the decision of whether or not I'm going to sign papers and send them off to the government to try to get deferred action status.
So we're going to do 2 more stories, because these next 2 stories show you people who might think the only hope they had was deferred action, but because they're coming in to talking to an immigration expert, they're learning there's other things that can help them. So let's talk about Lupe. Lupe came to the United States when she was 12, and she overstayed a tourist visa. So she entered the country lawfully, but then she stayed and stayed. She went to high school, she graduated, she married her high school sweetheart. He's a U.S. citizen, and they have a child who's born here. And children born in the United States, even born to parents who are undocumented, are U.S. citizens. Lupe's now 22 years old. So she came when she was 12, now she's 22, that's 10 years. She looks like she qualifies for deferred action, but what would you talk to Lupe about?
I would sit down with Lupe and her husband together in a room, and I would say to the 2 of them, there's another way that you might want to consider applying for relief or a benefit from the immigration authorities, and that is to get a green card through marriage. You're in a real marriage. You have a child with your spouse who's a citizen, and then I would walk them through the steps by which they might obtain what's called adjustment of status, in plain English, getting a green card through a real marriage.
Yeah, sometimes people think they can't do it because they've been undocumented, and they know that from other relatives who entered the country illegally that there's barriers to regularizing your status, to getting a green card, even when you're married to a U.S. citizen.
Correct.
But in Lupe's case, because she entered with a lawful visa, there is a way that she could get permanent residence. She's somebody who, it would be really a shame if all she did was apply for deferred action.
Right.
Okay, so let's turn to one more example. This is Diego. He's from Central America. And some of you may know there's a lot of gang activity in Central America, and there's a lot of poverty too. Diego's father died when he was very young, and his mother never was able to earn very much, and she really didn't take very good care of him either. Eventually, he decided life would be better in the United States, and he just left. His mom just wasn't taking care of him. He felt afraid on the streets. So he found a way, walked all the way up through Central America and Mexico, and he entered the United States when he was 14. Mm-hmm. Now he's 19. Can Diego apply for deferred action?
Diego sounds like a very strong candidate for potential eligibility for deferred action. To make that sound even simpler, he's got the 5 years. If he can prove he's got the 5 years, and this is the trick of it.
How does he prove he entered when he entered illegally?
Exactly. Unless somebody got a hold of Diego and enrolled him right in the local high school or junior high school, what have you, in their community, which thankfully we see in real life often, but not always, he'll be able to produce a school transcript that says he went right to school. On the other hand, if he went to work immediately, which some of these kids of course have to do because they're sending money back home or whatever else.
He's supporting himself, no one's taking care of him.
Exactly. Then you go to, does the employer that you worked for at age 14 have records that you were there? And back to what we talked about earlier with the phone and all the other things that you might have as proof that you have fingerprints and footprints, so to speak, in the U.S.
Yeah, if that employer says, oh, I'll give you the letter, kid, but it's going to cost you a lot of money, that's really a shame. You shouldn't have to pay to have an employer verify that you worked for them, even if you worked off the books. If somebody tries to shake you down for money, you know, we call it extortion, you should really talk to a nonprofit immigration provider or an immigration lawyer about how you might be able to get that evidence without having to pay for the records that are yours.
Exactly.
Well, So he might have that 5 years. It might be hard to prove, but to me, Diego is also a kid who doesn't know he might qualify for something called special immigrant juvenile status.
Right.
Congress has this really generous heart when it comes to kids that have been abused, neglected, or abandoned. His mom being unable to take care of him, his father dying when he's very young. If Diego is still under 21 years old, and if he can get a guardian here in the United States and a family court in New Jersey, New York, Ohio, California, wherever he's living, to make findings that he was abused, neglected, or abandoned, and it's not in his best interest to return to his country, that finding can allow him to self-petition to get a green card.
Right.
It's really a generous form of relief.
Yeah, special immigrant juvenile status is always there as something to think about if you're of a certain age and you meet the criteria that you were just talking about.
Yeah, you have to be under 21, though, to complete the whole process, and a family court is going to be involved. But there's a lot of nonprofit organizations and attorneys that will help you do that kind of work. So if you're someone like Diego, don't put all your heart just into deferred action. You really need to talk to lawyers about other options. So we've given you an awful lot of information. I think the one thing we haven't really said maybe enough is, how do people get help? How do they find out more? Do you have some thoughts about that?
Well, certainly in the last few years, our government's done a much better job in making a website that's user-friendly and available to the public at uscis.gov. And it's got information that's being updated regularly on this brand new deferred action program. And in addition to that, most people I'm speaking with who meet this criteria, it seems, are also quite computer savvy, and thankfully so, because the internet is a wonderful place. However, with one warning, there's a trillion websites, they tell me. Some of them don't have good information, so perhaps there's some, Lenny, that you might want to suggest that they might want to take a look at.
Well, here at New York Law School, you can go www.nyls.edu/immigration. We're going to be updating our immigration webpage all the time, and we'll direct you to reputable sites. Be really careful when you land on a web page that looks like it's a government site. If it's not .gov at the end of it, it may not be anything affiliated with the government.
Right.
How do you find a good lawyer? How do you find a nonprofit? Maybe you think you can't afford a lawyer. There are some good websites for that, and at the end of this video, when we post it, I'll put up some other websites about finding reputable nonprofit organizations. Harlan and I both are members of an organization called the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and certainly if you're talking to someone about doing this kind of advice for you, that would be an indication that someone has had some good training and is a specialist in this field.
Yeah, and I would add one caution to the people who are listening. There's these folks that are typically referred to as notarios by people in our world, the advocates for immigration. We say notario as a sort of catch-all, a phrase that's used, and even in non-Spanish speaking countries. Recently someone saw me from Israel and said, well, I believe the word in Hebrew was notarian. So this is a commonly used word that sounds like lawyer and is lawyer in other countries, but here in the US, they're a notary public, and it's much easier, of course, to become a notary public than it is.
It just means you can certify someone's signature. You didn't go to law school and you aren't trained. Don't go to a place that says, we sell airplane tickets and we also do visas. That's not the kind of immigration advice that you need. And there are going to be a lot of free clinics, and there are going to be a lot of community-based organizations to help you. You don't have to do this on your own. And the last thing I think we want to say is, don't apply now. If someone's telling you to apply now, your money's going to be wasted, your application will be rejected. The only people who can get any kind of assistance right now are people who are actually in removal proceedings. So if you're in a deportation and removal proceeding right now and you don't have a lawyer, you may want to think about getting one, or you may want to at least try to talk to the government side in the immigration case about, do you qualify for deferred action? If you're not yet in removal proceedings, or your removal proceeding is long over, you have to wait for the government to give us more information. Do we know when that's going to be?
There is a directive that I mentioned earlier was issued on the same day as the President's announcement on the strike that on the 15th of June of 2012 from the Secretary of the Homeland Security Department, Janet Napolitano, that directs the Immigration Service to begin implementing procedures. So this is all fancy language that basically in plain English plain English says, we're going to be able to do these papers for you on or before August 14th, within 60 days. That's what it says. We're not certain that in real life it's going to happen. So we're talking in the middle of July.
He's an optimist. I don't think it's going to happen. The government's already canceled one of their important meetings on July 18th. They're supposed to answer more questions. There's people in Congress that are angry. Here's how you can spend your summer. Start gathering your documents to show that you've been here for 5 years. And definitely get, if you've had any kind of arrest, get your criminal record in order. Stay out of trouble, get back in school, and we hope that you'll be able to use the information we gave you today, and we'll do updates that will help you guide you through this unusual program. Thanks, Harlan.
Thank you, Lana.